Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, it's really good to have you. And we're going to go through the story of what happened. And it's, you're in charge, really. I'm going to be asking you a few questions, but really, if you want to talk about it freely, then please can you all mute yourselves, everybody.
Still didn't do it.
Can you mute yourselves, please? Okay, thank you. Now then, let's find our speaker. Speaker view. Yeah, I'm going to ask you a few questions to prompt you, and then I'm hoping you'll feel happy to expatiate thereafter. First of all, I'd like to ask really how your background in nonviolent communications helped you work in ERCC.
Yeah, so I mean, I suppose initially, I don't know if people will know about nonviolent communication, but it's a way of looking at conflict. It's a way of looking at how people function in the world, based on the idea that we share a universal set of human needs, and that everything that we do, all of our behaviour, is driven by these universal human needs. So it's actually very related. The man, Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, who sort of pulled it together, studied under Carl Rogers, who was a humanist counsellor and psychologist. So so it has a lot of similar roots in terms of counselling, which gave me the sort of skills like, empathic listening, but also a real understanding and a curiosity about meeting people where they are, about trying to understand what's behind people's behaviour, even if I find it profoundly disturbing or upsetting. And it was wanting to come to an organisation where really, really at the sharp end of violence, I could really understand violence, and that's what kind of brought me to it. But yeah, the idea that we approach, I suppose for myself as well, it was studying nonviolent communication that gave me a sense of hope to navigate difficult situations and to stay with people where they are, and seek to understand. So, and to look at conflict as opportunities for growth rather than things to run away from. So, yeah, that's I suppose all of those things became important.
Yeah, that takes a certain philosophy, though, really, doesn't it, to undertake? Did you find that was welcome where you went?
Yes, well, I did actually deliver some training to some of the staff team in NVC. That's the abbreviation for nonviolent communication. Yeah, and so people were interested, and they could see the way that I was working. They could see the way that I was working in the team, and they could see what I was trying to offer. Those generally is valuable. So I felt, the skills were valued.
Yeah. You tried to discuss poor communications when you had a conversation with Maggie Chapman, who was at the time the chair of the Board of Trustees. What was the outcome of that?
So, there's a bit of confusion in there that Maggie Chapman was an employee at the time. She was the chief operating officer. That's okay. And just as soon as I'd got the job, it was still lockdown. I asked if we could go for a walk just to chat about the service, and it was at that she'd said something along the lines of trans women are women, and I'd said, well, what does that mean in the service, or like just to speak about. And it had been fairly light, but it was sort of my first encounter with that as a definitive unexplained phrase, I suppose. And then I'd had more of the conversation about communications was with so once when I'd started, Myrtle wasn't in post. Myrtle came into post soon after that, and Myrtle had done some podcasts, and I'd listened to them to think, well, what's this going to be like? Who is this person that's coming in? And I was a bit concerned about some of the messaging and some of the way that Myrtle was speaking about people who disagreed, and making sort of sweeping generalizations about racists and people being transphobic, homophobic, ableist, racist, and all in the same kind of breath. And I was like, this is not what I was hoping for in terms of leadership. But I spoke to the to Katie McTurnan, who was the next in charge, and was told, oh, that was very much activist speech. That isn't the way that Riddle will approach the job in place. And then as things progressed, that I'd also did speak to the chair of the board of trustees, who was Catherine Dawson at the time, to try, and we'd been invited to raise some of our, to do us. It was like a staff survey. We'd been invited to talk about things, and I'd raised some of my concerns, and we'd had a conversation about it. But with all of these things, there seemed to be an openness to conversation, and then a shutting down. Then it doesn't go anywhere. And whatever I'd offered in terms of trying to find solutions or trying to find a way through, that was absolutely genuinely trying to be respectful of everybody coming to their place, and where would their place, that everybody needs a service, that the service can employ anyone, but we just need to find a way that works for everybody and absolutely centres the service users. Yeah.
So you started work then after
Mm-hmm.
having had this chat with Maggie,
Mm-hmm.
And you were part of a team supporting victims, survivors, and in various duties that you had to undertake. So sometimes counselling, sometimes attending to admin tasks. And your duty included responding to incoming emails. Was it somebody took turns each day to?
Exactly, yes.
Right.
So we took, as part of the team, like different teams. I was part of the Edinburgh Adult Service team.
EAT.
That was a specific, yeah. So we would take turns, like one day a week, to answer the support email inbox. So that would mean that was where I would first get a sense of like the kind of emails that were coming in questioning Riddle's appointment, but also after Riddle did the Guilty Feminist podcast that some people may be aware of. There was quite a lot of concerned emails coming in. Some of them worded in really unpleasant ways, and some of them not. But the response from the organisation was to put them all into hate emails. So I'd got into a folder labelled hate emails and not respond. And I'd engaged with the organisation over that, and that was quite early on. That was kind of May 2021, June 2021, something like that, where I'd said, there's some valid points being made here. This is part of the nonviolent communication training in a way. It's like people express things in angry ways when they're scared, particularly. And our job as counsellors is to deal with that all the time. It's like people expressing things in ways that, you need to see beyond and understand and help unpick to see what it is that matters to them, that's got them so upset that they're willing to email an organisation, so it's like there's always something of value to find. So the idea that these weren't being responded to I found really challenging. That was as part of the duty team, I'd become aware of that. And then I suppose what the other part of the duty was people asking for support. And it was our job, like one or sometimes 2 days a week, to set up those initial, set up the support with people to come in for the service. So we'd have access to people's calendars, and we'd say, well, this person's got space coming up, availability, and we'd allocate them to somebody. Yeah.
Right. Just to recap for a moment, some of the anger or some of the reason why the emails were coming in would be because Meridia Wadwad's got this job, which there was a general occupation requirement, which is an Equality Act exception, for it to be a female who has this sort of work.
Yeah.
Now, and it was known that Meridia Wadwad was not actually a female, did not have a GRC, but even so, even with a GRC would be accepted, and this wasn't the case. So that was the context, really.
Yes.
of that, as you say, pain and anger and conflict.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And in all of this, these weren't being responded to at all. They came in and they were just filed.
Well, they were filed in this folder of hate emails, and then one had come in, the one that was featured in my tribunal, which a woman had written at length about her very strong reaction to this, watching this Guilty Feminist podcast, and Riddle had said that survivors, well, who didn't want to be seen by a trans woman would be bigoted. Essentially, she said that Riddle had said that was a bigoted response, and so didn't, and that it would be the organisation's job to reframe their trauma so that would be acceptable to them, and that really upset this woman in particular, a lot of people. And that one, it came up in tribunal because I'd made a point of forwarding that to Riddle and saying this one should be responded to, if sort of, if nothing else, this one, because it was very carefully, it was very carefully worded, and it was very as were many of them. But this was somebody who was saying that she'd been really traumatized, re-traumatized by the experience of watching, and it yeah, so yeah, I can't remember where I
And
was
what was the
going.
outcome of that when you forwarded it
Well,
to?
it was responded to.
Okay.
I'd asked to see the response because I was interested to know how the organisation was responding. And we were in this position as staff, responding to people, but also sort of more widely. And I was finding it in my personal life, people were sometimes asking, what's the organisation's stance on this? What's going on? And so I was curious to know how the organisation was explaining this. And partly, the organisation was open to people who identify, trans identified people of both sexes already, and was moving towards opening to all men. So in some ways, there could be a rationale. This is the universal service. We employ a whole range of people, and that means that everybody knows that they're welcome. But what I hadn't understood when Riddle was employed was Riddle was being employed as a woman. And I thought, well, this is all just part of being a diverse service, because it's important to be a diverse service to demonstrate we're open. And I didn't know at that time that Riddle had a caseload either. So yeah.
So was Middle giving support to women or to trans people or to men?
Yeah, to women within the.
Okay.
I didn't find that out till the tribunal. It was quite shocking.
And presumably there might be women who were open to that, but were they given a choice?
No, that was the point there. That was the point that I was consistently making, is giving people a choice up front.
Yes.
Not just women, because the issue is male violence. And in my experience, even some males and some trans-identified males would still rather see a female counsellor, because what they don't want is to see someone male.
No, indeed, for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah.
And were there any sessions which were marked out as being, female only, mixed sessions, male only, trans only, youngsters only?
Well, there were. So it all become a bit complicated through COVID.
Right.
So there were women only spaces before that. By the time I joined, everything had gone online.
I see.
So everything was online. So there wasn't a physical space that you were meeting people in.
Right.
And prior to Riddle being employed, everybody who worked there was female. So it was only a question of the people who were coming, and they weren't coming in. They were coming online.
Of course, they're online.
So there were nominally, then once we opened up again, there were nominally a couple, like a morning and an afternoon a week, that were women only, but the definition of woman had been changed by then. So then there were all sorts of strange things where people were trying to sort of make sense of that. And I remember an email coming around saying somebody who was male presenting and was going to be in the building during the women, and it was just, yeah, I mean, it made then nothing made sense anymore, you know, because quite a few of the workers are quite male presenting, even though we're female. You know, it's like, what does
Yes.
that mean? And that's if you make that the distinction, it becomes there is no distinction, you know.
Yeah.
So
It's part of queering society, isn't it?
yeah, there's well, we've lost the use of the words, so yeah, so it became impossible. So yes, there were nominally those spaces, and then they'd, as I understand it, since I'd left, or at some point they just ditched the whole thing because I think they realised it was unworkable, as a conceptually unworkable.
Yes.
But apparently they've brought those in. So I'm not sure how. Yeah, I think they're defining. I think they are saying now that there are some spaces, and they're saying they're for women who are born and have always been women.
Yes, I had a look at the website today, and there are 3 sessions, aren't there? There's an afternoon and 2 mornings and an evening, and
Yeah.
it says for women born women, or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
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 So you had this email come in, and there was a question about who would be giving the support to
Yeah.
this person.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk us through that?
Yeah. So this was the 15th of June, 2022. And I was on duty, and so an email had come in. There was a woman who had been raped, who was looking to have support set up, and as it happened, this woman had also had an initial meeting with someone else with a support worker, and it had been a mix-up of times and so on, and the woman had been let down. So there was an urgency to make sure this woman got support, and like we were really careful about that. Do you know? I mean, not that we wouldn't be anyway, but there was an extra layer of like, oh, the organisation's messed up a little bit here already.
Right.
And she was offered support with somebody who is a woman who identifies as non-binary, and who had changed name earlier in the year to a male name, like a typically male name, with a masculine spelling. So what most people would read and think, oh, this is a man. And so this victim survivor had been offered an appointment, had been given a first appointment with this person, and had been given the person's name, and on reading that had then emailed back, which was the email that I'd received, saying, I want to check, is this person a man or a woman, because I wouldn't be comfortable speaking to a man. Completely fair enough. That's a very frequent thing for me to have encountered during that time. So I wanted to respond to that, but I also knew that I'd been speaking about this issue in various ways, that we'd been told that we needed to respond, that this was something that was coming up, and when we'd in the staff team queried, like, how are we supposed to do this? We're happy to respond, but how are we supposed to do this in this instance? And we hadn't yet heard back the guidance on that, so I queried again, like, but I queried back to the worker with this male name, and I queried to my line manager, and I said, no, my instinct is to say that this person was born female or born a woman, and identifies as non-binary. And that was all I wanted to say, just to be clear that this is the situation, but to reassure particularly that this is a woman. You know, this is somebody female that you're going to see, which was the concern of the survivor. And for me, it's centering them, and what's going to make that possible for that person to come to use the service. So I did. So that's what happened. And then, yeah.
Now you've written a Substack, and I think we've just posted it in the chat. about
Yeah.
having encountered wasps. I'm a beekeeper, so I'm not a fan of wasps, but I understand they're helpful pollinators. But it's not pleasant when you encounter massed wasps. And I think that you really, in that Substack, you really get the feeling, the sensation of the accusation of transphobia and bigotry and what have you really well.
Yeah.
I'm sure people will want to read it later, but that was on the 15th of June, and everything went on from there.
Yeah. Yeah. So it all, I mean, that was although it was quiet, I mean, there was a bit of to and fro on the chat. That was all within the support service email. Various people, including Riddle, got involved at that point. And yeah, but it seemed to be like someone else, then my line manager, responded and said to this person that the official line was, "We don't employ any men," which I was also not happy with, because somebody knowing that Riddle is employed would know, if that was their take, then they wouldn't accept that. So what kind of reassurance is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I'd left it at that, saying, okay, that's the guidance, that's where we're at. And then, like, over the next week, I checked in with the non-binary worker, because I was concerned, because I wanted the organisation to sort it out without it being about anybody, and actually, so with this person, they frequently said, this is an organisational problem and it shouldn't be about me, and so, but that was met with very reactive, like that what I'd done had been humiliating, and they'd felt humiliated, and then I got, then my line manager got involved, and then senior management got involved, and within a week or so, I was being investigated over it. So I was invited to an investigation meeting. So I don't know if you want me to tell the whole of that story, but
it's a long draw. I wrote down a timeline about it. It was about 9 months or more, wasn't it? The whole process, until you got to the end of the whole investigation, disciplinary grievance and appeals. Just unaccountably long drawn out business.
So that was literally what happened. I mean, that was the incident. That internal email, was what led to 9 months of investigation, two investigations, disciplinary, a grievance. Then I put in a grievance at the end of the disciplinary, then the disciplinary appeal, grievance appeal, because that was, and then a disciplinary appeal. So by the time all of that was done, it was February the next year, from June the previous
and yet,
year.
when this person, we'll call them AB because that's the only way we have of identifying them. When AB decided to change their name, let's say, I'm just making a stab at this, from Leslie with an EY, which is a typically female way of saying the name, to Leslie with an IE, which is a typically male way of writing the name. I mean, I don't know whether that's true, but you would read that, wouldn't you, differently if it was Leslie with an EY or Leslie with an IE? You'd think one's a female, one's a bloke. And that's obviously an issue for a service which is dealing with traumatized women. And it didn't seem to occur to the management or the team leaders that this was something they had to attack, as an organization. How are we going to deal with this? It's unbelievable.
It is, and at the same time, they'd left it a long time before dealing with it, and then it happened that actually, in parallel to my raising it again in a very it's right here and now way, in parallel to that, there were conversations happening between Riddle and that person to try and come to something. And my sense is what happened was they found it was impossible.
Yes.
You know, it was actually an impossible situation. So I suppose one of the things that I was aware of, so right from the beginning, when Riddle was first appointed, Riddle had meetings with every staff member as an introductory thing, very nice, you know, and was generous with time. So I had about 2 hours, and actually quite a lot of interesting discussion and nuance, and you know, I went away quite reassured from that meeting. But one of the things that had come up was in that meeting was I'd raised, how does this work? We have people who identify as non-binary working in the organisation, volunteering in the organisation, and yet we say we're a women-only service with women-only spaces, and how do we do that? And Riddle's response was, I'll ask those people if they're happy to be read as women.
Mm.
And that seemed to me like, oh, okay, well then that doesn't fit with the I am what I am and I'm neither male or female, you know.
Yeah.
And I was quite happy with that. I thought, well, if that's the way the service is managing that, then that's, you know, that's okay. But that didn't happen. So my sense is Riddle wasn't completely on board with the whole idea of non-binary, and didn't know how to deal with it, and then was getting into more and more hot water over trying to defend something that actually isn't really. I mean, Riddle transitioned 30 years ago. Non-binary wasn't a thing.
Yes.
You know, so to try and, that's the trouble with this ideology, is actually it's so extreme and it's so demanding that it doesn't work for anyone. Everybody's stuck in it. You know, they can't, there's no, you know, Riddle had to defend this thing of non-binary, which actually couldn't. And so instead, so my sense is what was happening was there was my email chain, my stuff going on, and Riddle having these uncomfortable conversations where AB was getting more and more upset with the organisation for not finding a way through, and I was the scapegoat for that discomfort. Is my sense is Riddle went, it's not me that's upsetting you, it's not the organisation, it's Roz. It's Roz being transphobic and awful and not respecting your, you know, your identity, and it was like, oh, thank goodness there's something to take the heat off.
Yes.
It's sort of over there. That's how it seemed to. It was so parallel, and the timings were within minutes and hours. These emails and these phone calls that were going on, as I later kind of unravelled through, you know, freedom of information. No, not freedom of information.
Disclosure.
Data access. Yeah.
Oh.
So, and then it made sense in a way. Do you know, like I was where they could pin the impossible, you know, the thing that they were finding impossible wasn't about them, it was about me.
And yet it was clear from some of the testimony that, or the writings by the tribunal themselves when they're coming to the judgment, that Riddle Wadua had sent an email to AB saying, I'm sorry I upset you. Yeah. So it wasn't you that upset them at that point, it was Riddle in trying to negotiate this, how we're going to work this, a bit too late, had done the upsetting too.
Yeah.
But when I was reading this, excuse me, I'm going to be really insensitive now, but I was reading this and thinking, well, AB is a woman. She's working in a centre centering women's needs. She's decided for reasons of her own that she's non-binary. Fine. And then she decides to rename herself with a man's name. How then God's name did she think that was going to wash with the service users?
Yeah.
Am I being? I'm being a bit judgy. I know I am, but do you see? I couldn't work out how it was going to work.
Yeah, I mean, it was all within but we support, you know, the policies and so on. So again, it was, yes, and the organisation was saying that was fine. Do you know, like that was just this person becoming their true self, and that was absolutely fine, and the organisation would support them, and then couldn't really, because it was an anomaly within a service which is predominantly for women, but not only, you know, that had an understanding of you know, is founded on an understanding of sex being binary and sexual violence being predominantly perpetrated by males. I mean, vastly, like 99%
That's
of
vastly,
sexual violence.
absolutely.
So so it's like they introduced these policies that then undermined the actual foundation of the organization. And so of course there were all these places where it didn't add up anymore and couldn't make sense, you know, and that's what I was reacting to. But AB didn't make a complaint
No,
about me, you
no,
know, the
noticeable.
organization and AB's defenders, who are also caught up in the ideology, who think that they're doing this really progressive and brilliant thing by, you know, they all piled in then.
Yeah.
So yeah, so then the investigation was broadened out. So it wasn't just about the email, it was about everything I'd ever said or ever done in the whole of my time, year and a half there. So that's where it got.
And when you're looking at the evidence and the summation of that, when it comes to the employment tribunal judgment, their review of it at the end, it's clear that there was a wholesale tattletale business going on, and everybody who'd ever thought that there was something, or might only have just then thought there was something, had decided that they had to say something about you being frankly transphobic. And yet you weren't the only person with questions about this, were you?
No,
Do
absolutely.
you want to say a bit more about that?
Well,
or I don't need to name names, obviously.
Yeah, no, it was, I mean, that was really being invited, having gone through one investigation meeting and thinking, well, I've answered the questions, I've been reasonable, I've given my rationale, I've explained this, I've been talking about this for ages anyway, in various ways, but always with that, like, we can sort this out, this organization could become a beacon of working out how to do this well. And, you know, like, I understand there's trauma within various members of the staff team around this, you know, we've got to be really sensitive, but there's lots of things I'd suggested and ways and things I'd written, drawing on all those, you know, NVC skills. So I was when I finished the first investigation meeting, I thought, well, I've answered the questions. I've sort of done the thing, and I didn't really. And then there was silence, and in that silence, they just interviewed everybody. Like just so many people, and some more people came forward and wrote a letter of complaint, which clearly meant the investigation wasn't confidential, with all of their like things that I'd said. It was just. But I didn't know any of that. So then I got invited. So like a month later, I got invited to a second investigation meeting, and I just was, what on earth? Surely I've comprehensively answered the things, and I mean, I hadn't heard anything, but I'd been saying, well, when am I going to know the outcome of this meeting? Nothing. A month later, and then I get a second, and I'm like, why am I being investigated again? You know, and it was like, oh, some things. This was the comment that the judge described as unfortunately reminiscent of Kafka, was that some things some people had said at some times about you. And I'm laughing because it's so starkly dystopian now, but at the time I was saying what people have said, what things about me, you know, where's this, you know, and I was given nothing. I came to the investigation meeting and there were numerous things that people said, or well, she said this thing and I was a bit uncomfortable, or she said this thing and it was totally misinterpreted, or, you know, things I'd said in trainings, which is supposed to be a space you can ask questions. And, you know, it was just, and suddenly I was like, this is an investigation into my, you know, not everything I've said and done, but also trying to uncover some hidden agenda that I have, you know, that other people can see and I can't see. Or, you know, it was like, it was the strangest and very, very disturbing actually to go through that.
And did you have any support?
At that time, each of the investigation meetings, I'd had to argue quite strongly, but to be able to take another member of staff with me, to be a scribe, really, and a witness to because they'd said they wouldn't record it. And I said, well, I want to be able to take notes, but I won't be able to do that and answer questions. And, you know, I just want to know that we have a record of it that's accurate. And they said I could only take a union rep. And at that point, I only had telephone advice from the union, so I didn't have someone that would come. And so each of those I had a member of staff with me, who just came and had to be silent. They couldn't say anything, but at least they witnessed it. And then I started to get support. Then I was like, I really need support, you know, like this has completely shifted into something gone up, you know. And so I started to get, but I had support from an external supervisor. I had, fortunately, I mean, that's one of the good things about being part of a nonviolent communication community is that there are a lot of really good listeners in there who can help you get back on your feet. And so I really drew on that. And I say then I started to get more trade union support, and I got a full-time female trade union worker appointed to me, who then came. I first met her just before the disciplinary hearing. So I started to get a bit more kind of support around the edges from people who had some understanding. And I was getting more and more of an understanding as well of it's not just me that's going through this. I'm not the only person who's been through something like this, you know, and this isn't, and there was obviously also, you know, my immediate family. My husband was very supportive. I was staying at my sister's when I had the second investigation meeting, and she was very supportive. So yeah, I mean, it was people were, yeah, but it was unfolding, you know. I just remember like just feeling so utterly baffled and confused, and again just sort of finding my way. It was like a tidal wave of stuff, and then you sort of gradually step back enough to see it, and then find your way back onto your feet and go, right, okay, what do I need? What are the steps? How do I break this down? What is it I need to do next? And yeah.
I'm looking a lot later than this, because this is 2022, and it was at least January 24, wasn't it? Before we actually get to the tribunal hearing. A lot of time has elapsed since then. But what developed from your need to reassure the service user of the Rape Crisis Centre is said to have been a heresy hunt. And that has been the stuff of headlines, really. And really, it's a really good set of words. How did you feel when you heard Naomi say that?
Well, it's funny. There are lots of stages to going through something, and it was really, I was still, I suppose it was hard for me to name it like that, you know.
That wasn't your job. That was
sorry.
That was her job.
And that was her, and yeah, I mean, I had a brilliant legal representation by that point. I had Katie Wedderburn as well, and Naomi as barrister, and for her to say that, it almost it gave it back to me as like, this is how significant this is, and this was the first kind of measure of the impact in a very succinct way. You know, it's like, that is a very powerful thing to describe what had happened, and it was certainly the measure of the impact at that time. So it was really valuable, and I know from supporting women, they need that stage of the acknowledgement of just how significant the impact of traumatic things are. And I would say it's quite short-lived in a way. Like, it was valuable, and it was really valuable to have the judge describe it as reminiscent of Kafka as well. But for me, if we stop there, that doesn't do it. And I wanted to, you know, that it acknowledges and it validates something, but it didn't give me what I was looking for in terms
Didn't
of
solve the
answers.
problem.
It doesn't solve the problems. It doesn't explain how we've got here, and it doesn't explain what we do about it. And that's
all the time you seem to be looking. Well, you were looking for clarity, for a straight way, a way through like a minefield. Eggshelly, you talked about it being.
Yeah, that there must be a way through this. There must be a way through this. Yeah, so it's sort of it's really important stage, but it wasn't the end point for me. Yeah.
When you read the tribunal tweet records in the Substack that they've done of the employment tribunal, of your testimony, it was very moving to see how shocking and disconcerting the whole process feels to you. In your words, in response to examination and cross-examination, escalating the disciplinary process to gross misconduct and then reducing it to misconduct quite casually and without any explanation. Kafkaesque is just the right word for it, because there's no sense of anybody acknowledging that something big is going on here and not accounting for, it's just an admin error. What?
Yeah.
It just seems.
And it wasn't an admin error, but even claiming it as an admin error, and even or a typo, like that was at that point that was my career. That was my reputation in the field. That was everything. That was my own sense of fairness and justice as well in the world. Everything in that moment. Getting an emailed letter with stating this was being considered to be gross misconduct was heart-stopping and yeah, utterly terrifying. And so, and then not to, at that point Byra's place didn't exist, so where was I going to go and work? And I wanted to work in this field, and this work was important to me, and I was getting a lot of experience at it, and
you were good at it.
I was good at it, and I have improved since. But I was learning, and I was interested, and I think I had something really valuable to offer. So to have that just sort of ripped away, and the possibility also of just leaving under the cloud of gross misconduct, when I've never had anything like that in my life. Never had any kind of disciplinary issue.
It's shocking, isn't it?
It's years and years of work. It was really shocking. Yeah, it was a really, and then for that to be just so casually dismissed as nothing. Again, I had no sense of care or holding, or people putting themselves in my shoes. I was the oppressor. I was the enemy. And they were reacting because I was threatening this thing that they believed so passionately in.
And yet didn't, because if they had been able to believe it passionately, they could have dealt with the issue. That's a strange thing, isn't it? For such a passionate belief, you'd think they'd be able to account for how it went and how it would have an impact on the people that were using the service. What was the outcome? Let's get to the point now then, because what's the outcome of the disciplinary hearings? Because I'm reading this and my heart's stopping, and then it's going on, and it's you're suspended, you're on sick leave, and it's not it's not moving forward, is it, at any great pace?
No. So they took the disciplinary hearing was in October.
Right. 14th of October.
Wait till October for them to get round to doing it. And then there were 3 charges of one was transphobia in some, I can't remember how it was worded. Another was harassment, bullying and harassment, and the other was not following management instruction. And they dismissed the transphobia one, but they upheld the other 2. And they they said it had taken so long that they were going to waive the
Penalty.
warning that I would have got. So they waived the penalty, but I'd still been found. Yeah, it was still found against me that I'd bullied and harassed a colleague and not followed a management instruction.
This is AB that you bullied and harassed.
Yeah.
And AB didn't actually complain about you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so I'd appealed that. But I put, in the meantime, I put in a grievance. So they paused the disciplinary whilst they heard the grievance, and then I appealed the grievance, and then I got the disciplinary decision. I didn't get the decision until January or something. And then I appealed the decision, and they upheld it. And so I said, no. Well, I said that they needed to let Riddle and Nico know that no allegation of transphobia had been found against me, and they wouldn't do that.
Why wouldn't they? Did you ever get to the bottom of that?
They just said that they would know because of the disciplinary decision or something, that that they would know that they weren't going to make a point of saying it. I also asked them to let the whole staff team know that.
Yes.
Because so many of them had been interviewed and involved. I wanted them to get a really clear message that hadn't been found, and they wouldn't do that either.
Because?
So, against protocol or something. But you think, if I'd asked for it, you'd think, well, whose privacy are you protecting?
It obviously got out that there was a disciplinary going on for people to be interviewed and make these allegations.
Yeah.
So you would think, just for natural justice, that there would be a way of them concluding.
Clearing my name.
Yes.
They weren't interested in clearing my name.
I see.
I think they thought they just hadn't caught me yet.
Oh, right.
Yeah, they hadn't been able to prove it.
You'd sneakily got away with it.
They hadn't been able to prove it. So I was so good. I mean, that one of the disciplinary report pieces, the one that most hit me, actually, I will remember forever, point 16, which said that even though I seemed to sound like I was really, considered and thoughtful, and I didn't come across, that they knew, that they could tell that this was just how good I was at hiding my
truly, it was breathtaking,
truly nefarious self. That, and that for me was the witch hunt moment. That was the nadir. I can't. Yeah, she floats, Berna.
Yeah,
absolutely. There was like that. Where'd you go with that? Where'd you go when you're trying so hard to genuinely hear from everybody's perspective and trying to find a solution, and your genuine thoughtfulness is heard as
hateful bigotry.
Yeah, as being just really good at covering up your actual bigotry. I mean, there's nothing, you can't do anything with that, can you?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Looking at your cross-examination by their barrister, Mr. Hay, it looks to me, not actually being in the room, as though he's accusing you of sending an email reply to the external inquirer about AB's gender, and contrary to the policy of the centre. But that's not the case, is it?
No, it was an internal. It was
so
within
never
the organisation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you never disclosed the fact that she was a female.
No, I didn't disclose it to anyone. We knew.
Yeah.
We were the staff team. We knew that.
But you knew that anyway, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that is really extraordinary, isn't it? It's really extraordinary that this whole thing was confected out of a non-thing that didn't actually go anywhere.
Yeah.
But was discussions within your team.
Yeah. 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 Which is why I think it's more about the organisation not wanting to admit that they can't do it, that the thing's impossible.
Yeah, squaring the circle can't be done.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's move on a little way, because in the meantime, you've given your evidence, and then there's evidence by Nicole Jones, who quite a few of us know as satirical. And do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I didn't know anything about that.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, no, I didn't know anything about it. It was announced that morning to me that there was another witness,
Oh, right.
and I didn't know who that was, and I didn't know anything about the content of that. It was just, we've got this other witness who's come forward, and so that was that, and that was the evidence about Riddle having spoken at an Edinburgh University event, with the words something about inclusion is beautiful, but including is ugly, or something.
That's
And
right.
then if you can't, if people, a question had been asked about if people don't agree with your point of view, and Riddle had said I'd fire them. So
That's management technique.
yes, yeah. How do you get people on board if they don't agree with you? Well, you fire them. Yeah, something along those lines. So that was, I didn't know anything about that event. I didn't know. I'm grateful that Nicole was keeping notes as ever, but that
Yes.
I didn't know Nicole. I didn't know anything about any of that. Yeah, it certainly added weight to the argument that Riddle would prefer to get rid of people than have those difficult conversations.
And so it looked from then on, it looked a bit clearer. There was a bit of clarity that was the strategy, was to avoid conflict by getting rid of the person who was making them think things they didn't want to think.
Yeah.
How did that feel to you? I'm sorry, I'm asking you these questions about feelings, but it is a very emotional thing, isn't it? I understand this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it was shocking to know that had been said during this period, particularly, so it wasn't like the two things weren't linked in Riddle's mind. So, and again, I think it's the ideology. It's the ideology, and the people in it are just in it. I think play to the, this is Riddle playing to the crowd, what's expected,
and feeling that there's total support for Riddle's point of view.
Yeah. Yeah.
However,
enabled, encouraged, supported, and you can't deviate from that if your job depends on it.
No.
So, I mean, and Riddle was being lauded at, Scottish government and Inspiring Scotland and, the funders and all of that. And, was absolutely enabled and supported to take that line. And like I say, I think the ideology then, it traps people. You can't deviate from it because this is what happens, and this is what happens much more widely than just Edinburgh Rape Crisis Centre. So Riddle's in the world. Riddle knows that, I think the problem is that the ideology, people are stuck in it on all sides. It's the only, I mean, the most, you'll know well, but to encounter something where questioning in any way, not towing the line exactly to this illogical, bizarre, thing that we've known since mammals existed. Yeah, the idea that questioning that in any way is seen as oppressive bigotry, that makes it impossible for most people to maneuver within, and yet that's become policy across numerous organizations.
In defiance of the law, in fact, because it was clear from one of your managers, was it Barry Roscoe, who was doing the investigation?
Mary Roscoe.
Mary, I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
And it was clear that she had no idea about the law to do with protected belief of your nature. And whereas it seemed from your testimony that you'd come and join this and you're quite accepting of all the different people. You have friends and acquaintances, you've dealt with people who've transgender, that isn't an issue for you. You just need to know, and sometimes it matters, as as we say.
Mhm.
And yet that was kind of verboten.
Yes.
And the law doesn't make it so. The law isn't that way. And the fact that she didn't really know about Forstater, I mean, she kind of heard about it, but didn't know the name Forstater when Naomi was questioning her. That was quite bizarre, that somebody who hadn't had that sort of training was let loose to perform this investigation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you've been quite open and accepting of this sort of thing, so you've been quite looking forward to Riddle Wadwa having a different point of view and bringing that diversity in.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, that the idea. I mean, I've learned so much since then, and I probably have a different take on it now than I would have done then. At the same time, Riddle. Well, there's such a lot of diversity in all sides on this, and Riddle transitioned more than 30 years ago in India, at a time when homosexuality was illegal.
Yeah.
So that would be a fascinating story if it could be told, in some ways, about what are all the factors that why Riddle ended up there, and
Yes.
and then in this sector, and then and yeah, I think I think I was supportive in that, as I say, there was that enabled a prominent diversity that is important. You want all people to feel welcome to come to what was becoming a universal service.
Would it be fair to say that a different transgender person, even though they didn't fit the general occupational requirement, with a different pattern of working, might have navigated that a little bit more successfully, maybe? And
it is, but it's also the board. Like the board needed to not have swallowed the whole, ideology. Riddle was employed on the basis that this was Riddle's belief, and Riddle's a very ambitious person, I think. So this was a great opportunity, and he can unpack all of that. But that's the ideology is the issue, and very often it's the people who aren't trans-identified who are trying to push it forward with this absolute zeal that means other people can't actually dissent, from it.
And yet, as we know, that's not how it turned out. Let's move on a little way.
Yeah.
Because that must have been a very difficult time for you personally. But in between that time, what was the outcome? Let's see. The grievance appeal recommended that the centre apologise to you.
Yeah.
Did that apology ever come to fruition?
Not until not until the tribunal
made them,
and then not until actually after that it still didn't. It wasn't done adequately, and my lawyers contacted them and said, this isn't, the apology was kind of sort of mealy mouthed wording in amongst a bigger thing, but eventually they did publish the entire apology as I'd requested it, and I think it's still there. But yeah, no, I mean it took, what was that, a year and nearly 2 years.
Yeah.
Before I got, so I've never had. Right, no, I got an apology in writing. I got an email apology. Gosh, when did I get that? After the tribunal, after the judgment, but it was just privately to me, and I said I wanted my name cleared. I wanted that, because that was my way of reaching actually the staff team as much as anybody else.
And that private apology came to you, not an official apology, but a private thing from a member of staff or a member of the board?
Yeah, from a member of the board, yeah.
Yeah. And by this time, a lot of the board had gone. A number of people had resigned or left in one way or another.
Yeah.
And tell me, you also asked that Nico, I don't know how to pronounce this, Kubataru and Mridulwarwa be informed that there was no evidence found that you were transphobic. You said that had not happened. They hadn't been told.
Yeah.
And there was no prospect of them being informed officially that was the case.
Yeah.
So there wasn't, from your point of view, there wasn't a clear finding of not guilty.
No, absolutely not. Like, and there was I had no assurance that they weren't going to just keep looking. You know, I'd addressed that in
the grievance.
The grievance appeal, I think. And I said, do you stand by everything you put in the report? And Nico said yes. So I said, well, then there's nothing, you know, then I'm not at all reassured that you're not looking just for the next thing that I do.
Yeah.
You know, to be interpreted in how you interpret it. So yeah, I felt very, very unsafe at that point in the organisation. I mean, I did anyway, but I felt too unsafe to consider coming back, and that was when I handed in my resignation.
How you had been poorly by this time because of the
yeah, I was off with stress from the point at which I got, like, a few days after getting the letter saying gross misconduct. That was the point at which I realised that I could not, in conscience, go and support women or support people.
Because your own head
because my own head was so messed up by it.
Yes.
Yeah, I was in bits, and I just couldn't do it. So I went off sick. That was in September
22. So that was 3 months after the date that this.
Yeah, so I kept working. I kept working as much, as best I could, because I kept thinking, we'll sort this out. We'll sort this out. This will, it can't possibly. Like, surely reason will prevail here, and we'll sort this out. And then it didn't. And then and then the gross misconduct. I just couldn't fathom. I couldn't believe. So then, I needed loads of support, and I got support. I got support every day from different people, and I just did lots of real, like, intense self-care as well, and going to the library to work on it rather than doing it at home, and making sure I got out for an hour every day, and that kind of stuff. Just like, what, how do you keep going? And that, and then I got support from trade union, and then I got a trade union lawyer.
And that was, I mean, your union had been quite good. That was Unite, wasn't it? It offered you Miss Binney.
Yeah.
But I understand you're saying very understandably that they have to nurture their funds.
My sense is, had it been on a different topic, they might have made a different decision, because I think it is in the public interest, and I think that it's in employers' and employees' interests everywhere for this stuff to get heard and understood and changed, so that this can't keep happening, as we know it keeps happening. And so I think it was very much an important case, and it was important in terms of, only at the judgment was it really clear that this was the first time it was seen as the employer having gone to an extreme ideology, rather than it being an individual who has some kind of outlying view that has to be accommodated, which is the way other cases, Maya was portrayed, and then Joe Phoenix was portrayed as being this outlying person that sort of inconveniently has to be accommodated because the law says so. Whereas this was the first time that the judgment was the organisation had taken an extreme view that was incompatible with centering service users, and that so it was important for that, and that wouldn't have happened, like, that questioning of that position wouldn't have happened had I taken shut up and go away money.
So this was the October of 23.
Yeah. No,
And
that was about it was September, I think.
of 23.
23. Yeah.
So there's already a year and a half, getting on for a year and 3 months, 15 months after the incident itself.
Yeah.
And they may make an offer which is derisory, and you can't take that. And how did you manage to get to Naomi? I mean, she normally is based in London. Did you have contacts?
I emailed
You
her.
you'd known that she'd appeared in other cases.
I'd seen her, yeah. I'd been following things by that point, and I'd seen her in Scottish Government, I think.
Of course. Yes.
I'd seen her speak, and I thought, oh, here's somebody who's very, very clear and reasoned and calm. And yeah, actually, I emailed a couple of different people, but she got back straight away that night, and we spoke, and the relief, yeah, and
Palpable.
the validation of having somebody with that experience backing, yeah, was just
and grit as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll forever be grateful for that. I mean, that moment was a massive turning point for me. Because I thought, well, what do I didn't even know you could represent yourself, to be honest, in an employment tribunal, and the prospect of doing that would have been pretty harrowing, I think.
Yeah. So from then on, you were working with your solicitor, who apparently is a really good egg too. The name escapes me, but
Katie Wedderburn.
Right, Wedderburn.
Great. Yeah.
With Katie Wedderburn and Naomi Cunningham on making this case.
Yeah.
They were putting together the jigsaw, really,
of
a pattern of behaviour.
Yeah. That was the first. It was really, really thoroughly understood, and they were brilliant. And they were very generous with time and working very much as a team with me. And there was, hundreds of communications going back and forth to kind of navigate. So it was a bit rewritten at that stage, and then there was loads of stuff happened. And that's the thing. It's a full-time job. Do you know, that's the weird thing is it's a full-time job. Yeah. And I was employed again by that point, so.
Because you had got a job when you put in your resignation, then you went and was there a job going already at Byra's place, or?
I just approached them and they said yes, thankfully.
Yeah.
So they interviewed me and then, gave me a job. So within a month I was employed again.
But it wasn't the same hours, and it wasn't quite the same job. Is that right?
It's pretty much the same job, but it's not. It was slightly reduced hours because I knew that I needed to, have extra capacity to do this
work. Yes.
Thing. And also I'm studying. I've been studying at the same time. So, yeah.
Oh yeah. On what, can I ask?
So I'm doing the diploma in counselling and pluralistic counselling.
Fantastic.
At the same time, so nearly finished that. But yeah, that was a thing that I managed to keep going.
Good.
Through all of this, so yeah.
Wow. So when it came to it, and it didn't come to it until the January, I think it was after. Actually, after the anniversary of Byra's opening, that you and Naomi were present at that event, weren't you? And Naomi gave a great.
No, I wasn't at the. No.
Oh, right. Naomi gave a great talk.
No, that wasn't the Byra's opening. That was the Byra's conference.
I think it was an anniversary of.
It was an anniversary. Yes, sorry. Yes, it was the anniversary event. Yes, the conference. Yeah.
And that was a brilliant event, wasn't it?
It was absolutely brilliant. Yeah, and that was the first time we met in person.
Oh, really? Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good. Yeah. And so after then, this was in the January following, you had this date to appear at the tribunal, and they went through this evidence. And eventually they agreed with was it yours or was it Naomi's description of what you'd suffered as a heresy hunt? I don't know whether that was your phrase or hers.
That was hers, I think.
And
Yeah.
they loved that, didn't they? The tribunal really got that was what was going on there.
Yeah.
They've obviously seen this sort of thing before.
Mm. I don't know what, I mean, it was quite hard to fathom what was going on, what they knew and didn't know, but that, yeah.
And it summarised your case as that the CEO, the chief executive of ERCC, Mridu, who is, as we know, a trans-identifying male, was, and this is a word that really makes a difference, the invisible hand behind everything that had taken place. You know, that's a very Adam Smith term, isn't it? The curious thing is that several people who were key actors in this business, in this whole thing, refused or weren't called, and I don't know how to categorize it. They weren't there to give evidence. It was like an absence, a non-thing. There was all this stuff going on and people, you know, giving evidence about it, but the people who had done the things and have said the things, they weren't there. Was it ever accounted for why they didn't come?
Well, the Edinburgh Rape Crisis line was that Middle hadn't been involved in the investigation, so she wasn't relevant, had remained distant from it, which evidence showed that that wasn't the case, and that Nico, who'd headed up the investigation, had moved on, and they could have called both of them, but they didn't. They chose not to.
Yes, and the tribunal, they drew their inferences, as they said. They were entitled to draw inferences from the fact that certain people didn't come.
Yeah.
And they judged it as the ERCC's stance was at the very extreme end of gender identity theory.
Yeah.
And they concluded there was absolutely no need for a rape crisis centre to be seen to take such a stance.
Yeah.
Which I read that and I thought, wow, they've really got this.
Yeah, that was quite a thing to receive.
And the judgment, and we posted this in the chat. The judgment said that this extreme gender identity belief was prevalent in the ERCC and was held by the respondents' witnesses. All of them seemed to take the same line. They haven't had anybody with an opposing. You can't have been the only person in the organisation to be a realist about sex in a rape crisis centre.
I know I'm not, and I know that people were too scared to speak.
And you were even asked to kind of dob them in, weren't you?
Yeah. And I refused to do that. I mean, I think it's very personal, and you need to know that you've got a lot of resource around you to be willing to take this on. So I knew that I was quite uniquely placed to do that, and that I didn't want to do that to anybody else, seeing what they were doing to me.
But they seem to expect you to say, oh, such a body thinks the same as me, this person thinks the same as me, and kind of offer up these sacrifices to buttress your case. What were they thinking? Yeah. Anyway, this is what they said in the judgment for the on the facts of the matter, and then it was delayed by another few months for you to have a hearing as to the remedy. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
So the remedies part is to remedy the harm. So once they've decided that we'd won the case, then how are they going to make it better, essentially? And we'd made a bunch of requests. It's a bit unusual to make requests of an organisation once you've left it. So we knew we were asking the unusual. But we wanted them to the things that I'd been asking for all the way through, the things that I'd wanted were that they give a definition of woman that's clear and ambiguous, so at least people know what they're coming to. And I knew what I'd like that to be, but I wasn't just saying that they had to agree with me, but they did need to make it absolutely clear and upfront. And I also wanted them to have to give a decision, the choice on the basis of sex at first point of contact for people coming to the service. So not down the line, not once you've had a meeting, not in a meeting, not, you know, just at that point where would you like to see a male or female worker?
Yeah.
You know, and any other things that they wanted to offer. You know, if people wanted to be given the option of seeing someone who was trans identified, then they could do that as well. But that was the thing that was really important to me, and then the apology, and you know, a couple of other things. So the financial compensation had already been agreed, so we didn't need to negotiate that in the tribunal, in the remedies hearing. But the other things we put forward, and we didn't get much of it. Again, it was unusual for the tribunal to ask an organisation to do something once the employee is no longer there.
But there was a point to that, wasn't there? Because it wasn't about affecting you. It was about affecting the service users.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's, I was, disappointed somewhat that they didn't think that was part of their role, when it was clearly what they believed was right from the judgment, but they didn't think it was within their remit to do that. So, and they did get the public apology as a result of that. But then the link report.
What you're saying is the ET tribunal didn't think it was their role to do it. They did make recommendations.
Yeah.
That they should refer people onto buyer's place, because that's another aspect of
it. Oh yes, that was one of the other recommendations, was that they had to put, and they did do that. They did.
It's still there. I looked today.
It's still there, yes. And there was some toing and froing about where it was and how prominent and how explicit, and now it's there very much under women only services.
That's right.
And we haven't had a referral yet.
Oh really?
So whether people are finding that information coming, we haven't had a single referral through Rape Crisis Scotland helpline still. So there's still, I think, within the organisation a reluctance to let people know about Buyer's Place. That hasn't been addressed, and certainly within the Scotland-wide organisation. So yeah.
And after this, after the remedy hearing and the actual final judgment, obviously you got compensation for the constructive dismissal, the harassment and direct discrimination that you suffered. Let's not beat about the bush. This was not just, you know, you having some money. This was actually a huge detriment that you underwent. So you know, they were liable for that, and you know, that was a quite appropriate thing for them to do, for them to make. And they also made some orders to the Edinburgh Rape Crisis Centre. They did make an apology. Did they publish a statement signposted in Buyer's Place? Yes, they did, for those seeking a woman-only environment. And what else were the things that you wanted, and what else were the things that you got?
I think that was all that I got. I didn't get this specific definition of woman, and I didn't get. I've
got a note here that apologising for alleging that you were transphobic and acknowledging that there was no evidence to support that was in the judgment.
The final apology that we got eventually, with a bit of toing and froing, the second attempt at an apology that was on the web page, was exactly what I'd asked for them to write. Which is kind of odd, to write your own apology and have it published. It feels a little bit hollow, but then that's it's, at least it was publicly there. So yeah.
And they had to publish this acknowledgement that it's disciplinary decision that you'd misconducted yourself.
Oh yes,
that was wrong, and that you were motivated by a wish to act in the best interest of the service users.
Yeah.
But did that feel, did that feel a big weight off your mind at that point when they said that?
Well, it was important to me that it was said. It's important to me that it's there, it's public. I guess it did. It was strange when I actually saw it. It touched me, and I cried, and I wasn't expecting to, having written it, I wasn't expecting to feel that way, but there was something important about having that publicly stated, and ambiguously publicly stated, that actually meant more than I expected it to.
The force of law was behind that.
Yeah.
It wasn't just you saying it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. That was
Mhm.
vindication.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was, and that's what I'd been saying. You know, I was saying all the way through. I was saying, but I'm doing my job. It's my job to center surveys. You know, I'm being punished for doing my job. You know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And also that they had to say that nothing you did amounted to bullying or harassment, because there was none. You had not done that. And that the ERCC accepted the findings that it harassed and discriminated against you because of your protected gender critical beliefs.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
you know, that is vindication, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It is.
What else?
It's a funny thing though, because that sense of like, and a few people said, "Oh, I'm glad you got what you wanted." Well, did you get what you wanted? And I've another piece that I'll put out at some point is about that, because what I wanted was for us to find a way through this and for everyone to still get a service, and
Yeah.
you know, and we still haven't. There still isn't. You know, that's what I wanted, and I want this to stop happening to women, and it hasn't stopped happening to women. So, you know, I wanted a lot more, and I wanted that choice up front on the basis of sex for people coming, you know, who've
But so no,
experienced
it
no
is
violence.
actually there. It is actually provided. I mean, I had to search for that, to be honest. It wasn't front and centre. I had to look for it, looking at it today. But it is there. But you're saying you're not getting any referrals either from them or from RCS, Rape Crisis Scotland?
No, we're getting plenty of referrals, I want to say, but we don't. We haven't had any referrals that have told us that that's their referral pathway anyway.
Why do you think that is?
Because I think the frontline workers are still captured.
Yeah.
A lot of them.
They just don't want to.
Yeah.
The
And I think
sooner the
Rape Crisis
women.
Scotland, it's still the party line very much. The organisation saying this isn't, you know, I'm discredited and Virus Place is a, yeah.
And yet, let's go on to the after the conclusion of the case. RCS, Rape Crisis Scotland, commissioned a report, and Vicky Ling, who's got quite a lot of experience at doing this sort of thing, pulled no punches.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about this too?
Well, that report came in before the remedies hearing, so I was able to speak to it quite a lot at the remedies hearing, which was useful, and was very clear. It was on the back of the report then that Riddle stood down as chief exec. So there was no sense in which there was any kind of investigation or disciplinary or anything that Riddle had done, which to me was still quite staggering. At the same time, just found to be lacking in management leadership by the Ling report. So that was when it was mutually agreed that Riddle would step down, apparently.
So they had to have this report.
Yeah, the tribunal's judgment wasn't sufficient for that. They had to have this report to make that decision. And even then it was mutual, but it wasn't. It was very, yeah. And Vicky Ling said very, very clearly that not waiting for a meeting, not putting people in a position where they had to talk about their values or views or to make some understanding of definitions, but Vicky Ling said very clearly that upfront point of contact decision on the choice on the basis of sex of the person who's going to support you is important, and so their own report has said that, and yet they're still not being as explicit as that in their practice, and Rape Crisis Scotland is still refusing to do that. So
yeah, because the report says that Wadwell did not understand the limits on her role's authority, so went beyond the authority that could be expected. And that's pretty damning, to be honest.
Yeah.
And RCS paused new referrals to ERCC at that point.
Yeah.
Because they say that the findings were challenging. It was extremely concerned they, over a 16-month period, the centre, that's Edinburgh Centre, didn't provide dedicated women-only spaces, which are part of the national standards, right?
Well,
Oh, no?
they are part of the national standards, and Rape Crisis Scotland trying to make Edinburgh Rape Crisis out to be the outlier here, when it's was following Rape Crisis Scotland policy. I mean, Rape Crisis Scotland are very much that women only spaces aren't women only. You know, I mean, Rape Crisis Scotland are, I mean, yeah,
They
we're
don't
definitely
mandate them.
trying to distance themselves from the publicity and making it about Edinburgh Rape Crisis Centre when it's not, you know.
They are not saying that there need to be female only, natal women, born women, still women services for women who've been subjected to gross violence.
Rape Crisis Scotland are not taking that as a national stance. No, they're saying that even now they're saying they won't give absolute guidance on that. They won't take that position. They're still trans women are women.
They're prevaricating.
Yeah, and the Ling report was an opportunity for them to distance themselves from the
They
publicity.
could have made it better, couldn't they?
Yeah.
And they missed that opportunity.
Yeah, they're still missing that opportunity.
So they're not adhering to their own standards.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So no sackings, nobody held to account. Sandy Brindley, the head of Rape Crisis Scotland, is still there. And there is what I see as a positive. I don't know how you feel about this, is that since all this has happened, Glasgow, they have said they're no longer affiliating themselves. Have I misunderstood that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So is that a crack in the wall, do you think? Because that's another big centre, isn't it?
It's the biggest centre, yeah. Yeah, well, I think it's a clear message that centres want, well, they want to underpin their way of working with something that makes sense, you know, an understanding of male violence based on biology and socialization.
Yes.
So, and if we don't have that, then we don't have an underpinning of the work that we're doing anymore, you know. So I think that's quite significant. And Edinburgh Women's Aid as well, obviously a separate organisation, but for them to take a stance on single sex space as well, in the last couple of weeks is hopeful. Yeah.
So in the last couple of weeks, Edinburgh Women's Aid has come out to say the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
That is a big turnaround, isn't it?
Yeah. These are very significant.
And nobody in government. Sorry, I'm naive. I'm living in England, which has its own problems, but nobody in the Scottish government has wanted to say anything about this. Or
lots of people have said things. But they've generally been vilified for it. Where we've had some very strong MSPs standing up and asking the difficult questions, but yeah, not at a top leadership level have they actually taken this on and grasped it. And there's been a lot of, I mean, I've often pointed to between Scottish Government and Inspiring Scotland, because Inspiring Scotland are the in-between body that have been funding all of these organisations. And so Scotland, you know, Scottish Government said, oh, it's not for us to make policy. And Inspiring Scotland have said, well, it's not for us to make policy. We're just, you know, and so it's sort of, you know, ping pong between the two as nobody's responsibility to take a stance on this. It's up to the individual organisations. You know, we don't interfere on policy matters, on operational matters, kind of, you know, and it just gets, nobody is saying this is something that's bigger than any of that and needs to have a national, you know, a government-led proper direction on, you know.
And that's the very thing that I would think that Rape Crisis Scotland's role is in this, is to lead.
Well, yeah, and I think also if your funder's saying you have to say one thing, then it's harder. And if Scottish Government's saying the funder has to say something, then that's harder again, so it does go right to the top, in my view. Yeah.
But the whole of the government, the whole of the political class, and I don't exempt my own lot, if you'll pardon my saying so, from this at all. There have been a few really good voices speaking out in terms of supporting women. Some of them from the SNP, some of them from Labour, and some of them, I think, from Conservatives. But
yeah, there are
nothing from Greens, nothing from SNP really at leadership level, but dissident SNP members, if I can say that. Have I got that right?
Yeah.
And of course they get binned when they step out of line.
Yeah.
Okay. So coming back to NVC, non-violent communication, which I know you're an exponent of, you're a certified trainer. I wonder whether training of that sort would be useful for women like us, sex realist women who are trying to have these difficult conversations and trying to be empathic and understand the needs of people on the other side who are humans the same as us. We're not trying to exterminate anybody's rights or would non-violent communication, would a training scheme of that sort be any good for people like us to kind of get our heads round?
At the risk of touting for my own employment.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying I don't know about this. What I'm asking is, would this be a way of addressing some of the needs for get some sort of dialogue going?
I suppose there are many people involved in this from many different angles, and dialogue with some people is possible and with other people is not, no matter what.
Right.
So I wouldn't want to make false promises, because I was certainly trying very hard to have dialogue with people that were, at this point in time, completely unwilling to come to the table. So at the same time, I think NVC does offer some really useful tools and principles with which to maximize the possibility of dialogue and to give space, and I think there is some things about appealing to some higher principles. So, if, like, for example, inclusion, if we really want inclusion, what are we really doing and what's really working? And, that, but also a principle of whatever, none of us can be, 100% certain that there isn't, that whatever we believe, we're not going to find something that's going to shift our thinking. So the idea that we enter dialogue with a genuine, that there has got to be some space for disagreement, as a principle, rather than we're right and you're wrong and we're going to educate you on it.
Yes.
So there are definitely skills and tools and ways of thinking about conflict and dialogue and different positions and boundaries and capacity and all of the things that play into this. A way of understanding the complexity of what you would say maybe is our side, which is, again, we're not one monolith at all. And so how we understand the complexity of that and understand the complexity of people, coming from the other side, if there is, like I say, I don't really take
another dimension, you say.
But so I think allowing for the complexity in other people, allowing for the complexity in ourselves is a really important thing that NVC can support us to do. Yeah.
I think Helen Joyce says in Trans somewhere towards the end that we've got to look beyond what our positions are and try and see what result we're trying to aim for. So in some respects, we have got to forfeit some of our entrenched positions in order to make an advance.
Yeah.
That sounds a bit militaristic. I don't mean it to be militaristic.
That's okay. Yes, I think we need to also see where we're trying to get to with this. And like I say, there are stages at which we need to be very boundaried and very clear and very and re-owning language and things like that. I think there are times and places where that's absolutely critical, but there are also times and places where we won't get anywhere unless we can connect with people and we give people opportunity to step back from a position that they've held, for example, a little bit, and to say, oh, they're not, they over there are not all like that. Whether whichever side it is,
Yes, that's
we need
reasonable.
to be able to do that.
You've got to see that not everybody is, whatever point of view you are, absolutely opposed to your point of view at all. Although there will be points where there is no possibility of agreement.
At this point, I would say, it's like, again, it's time and place and space and capacity.
But one of our peers wrote quite a nice article saying that we should be able to disagree well.
Yeah.
And in many cases, that disagreeing well isn't happening anywhere, not nearly enough places, because there has to be a way that you can say, well, this is my position. I understand your position, but I don't agree with it.
Yeah.
But I respect that you have that position, and I respect that you understand and respect my position, but that we have to try and get a bit more negotiation to get any question of having any sort of agreement, or just say that's as far as we can go at the moment, as you say.
Yeah, yes, and I think that I think the ideology is part of a bigger critical social justice ideology that doesn't allow for disagreement. So there's a bigger problem in it. And so how we get through that and a bigger problem of how we define harm now, so disagreement is characterized as actual violence,
literal
violence rather than disagreement. And how do we get to a place where we get to a mutual understanding of that before we can really, that people are comfortable with the idea that disagreement isn't actual literal violence.
How would you do that then? How would you get to that point? Because I don't feel that I am being literally violent to somebody if I say I don't agree with you. Yeah. In politics or in anything else, I can get along with people in a different party.
I think we need to stop promising safe spaces. We need to promise to make places safe enough for people to be brave and for people to withstand different points of view.
Yes.
And we need to unpick all that with people. That's another whole area that I think is really
developing resilience really is a crucial factor, isn't it?
Yeah, and like I said, then the higher principle of, like, it's really important that we disagree with each other and we can say so, because it's actually really dangerous if we don't. So, that if people can buy in at that level, then they can recognize what they're doing isn't that, So
go on, say a little bit more about that.
Well, if people buy into the principle that it's really dangerous to have dictatorship where nobody can disagree, for example, it's dangerous for everybody. Most people will agree with that. Then to recognize that what you're doing when saying you can't disagree with me because that's actual harm is
totalitarian, isn't it?
The same thing. So, but unless people agree to the higher principle, then they won't agree. Then they won't recognize. They aren't able to recognize in what they're doing.
Yes,
I think there's that, and that makes it sound simple, and it's not. But I know people who are working really hard to try and find a way through with that stuff at the moment within NVC based community. So yeah,
watch this space.
Yeah.
Have you got any more thoughts that you'd like to share with us? Because we're coming to, we've spent a long time on this, I'm sorry to say, but it's been gripping. It's been really interesting. But have you got any more thoughts that you can think about whether this shouldn't be happening to anybody else?
It shouldn't be happening to anyone else, and I think it's happening to a lot more people than make the headlines. I know it is, and I suppose the thing I want to do is thank every single person that's taken, you know, that's spoken up, every single person that's supported me, you know, my own family, my own my colleagues, you know, my legal team, people that have supported in a myriad of ways that I won't even, you know, can't even name them all, and I hope they know who they are. But especially the women that have stood up who haven't had a tribunal to take, you know, who've just left jobs over this or been hounded out and haven't. I've got my hounded
Yes,
badge on.
yes, yes.
So,
I've got one of those. It's great, isn't it?
from Jenny Lindsay's one of those people, but
Yeah.
she's one of many, and I think, yeah, I think that's what I want to say. Support those people and each other, and it's a big thing to go to tribunal. It takes an awful lot out of you, and don't do it lightly, and don't feel bad if you don't do it, because, you know, it's a lot to gamble with.
Yes.
You know, and most people don't have the luxury of another job to go to. I'm a second earner in the household, you know, like lots of these things. It's like, and
Makes a lot of difference.
it makes a massive difference to have those things. But, and even with all of that, it still takes a very, very long time to sort of recover, heal, remedy.
Yeah.
I'm certainly not there yet. I know other people aren't either. So I suppose just do the bit that you can do. That's what I'd want to say to people.
I noticed on LinkedIn recently that Naomi posted something about some firsts that she'd undertaken, and that was being offered soup every day during a hearing. This is you, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Was it the same soup or a different soup?
No difference. I made soup every night, and took it up. It was the boiler had broken at the tribunal, and it was absolutely freezing. It was so cold in there. We were sitting there with jumpers and hats and gloves, and so having flasks of hot soup at lunchtime
made all the difference.
And I've been a community worker for years, and sharing food is such a good way to bring people together.
It's a constant of culture, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. So yeah, so it's a bit of a thing of mine to do that, and it just felt like a really nice routine. We made soup. I made soup the night before. We walked up in the morning. We had soup together at lunchtime. It was really, yeah, it was better than crappy sandwiches when you're staying in some you know, nice, but nevertheless away from home hotel. You know, I wasn't, but Naomi was, and, you know, nice to have some homemade soup.
Absolutely, it's always nice to have a homemade soup, but in those circumstances, I would think it would act as not a displacement, but a ritual for you.
Absolutely, well. Yeah.
Look, I think this has been one of the most moving events that we've held, from my point of view.
Thank you.
For a lot of reasons, thank you. And I know that everybody else here has been gripped, because for once we've had no questions. We've never had no questions.
Are they awake?
No, they're awake, all right. But you know, that people are paying great attention to what you've had to say, and it's been very, very interesting, very moving, and the process of reading it has been an absolute trial, let alone having endured it. So I'd like to thank you, and thank all your supporters as well for doing this for you. I'm going to thank Rachel now for managing the event, the Liberal Voice for Women. We've not decided yet whether we've recorded this, but whether we're going to publish it or not. That's a matter for you. It always is.